The religious are, shall we say, dumb. They do not understand anything outside of their own echo chambers, and when they try, half-heartedly, to go beyond their own blind faith, things just don't go very well, do they? So let's look at a clear example of that coming up next. Today, we're going to take a look at a video from Answers in Genesis Canada where Calvin Smith is going to try, and I stress try, to show that atheist morality doesn't make sense, mostly by just making bald assertions that only his own religious beliefs do. Somehow, I just don't think that's going to work, but I guess we'll see. So, let's get on with it.
This video will show you where the idea of right and wrong comes from, and why atheism can't.
No, as I think we all expect, it's going to show what Calvin Smith believes about right and wrong, even though he can't back any of it up rationally. Granted, I haven't seen any further into the video than this, but you get to the point where you just see these things coming a mile away. Granted, my experience with Calvin and the idiots at Answers in Genesis Canada might have some impact, but mostly this is just how Christian apologists handle things. It's an automatic, God did it, with no evidence offered, and everybody else is wrong, so there. It's how they want things to be, without caring about how things actually are. So, with that prediction out of the way, let's keep going.
Whenever someone declares someone's done something wrong, they're communicating they believe there's a moral law, and that the perpetrator of the offense broke said moral law. Hence, what they did was wrong.
No, they're not. They are saying that said individual has violated an entirely human-made legal statute. And that's why he's got the justice scales back there. It has nothing at all to do with morals or any gods, although I'm pretty sure he's going to try to assert that somewhere down the line. The problem is, they just really like the idea of a god, but are entirely incapable of demonstrating that any gods actually exist. They are looking for a simple set of moral statutes that are true forever and ever and always, so that they don't have to think about them ever again, and there doesn't have to be any nuance. In other words, they don't want to have to live in the real world where none of that is actually true. And this is why these people have to grow up and learn to deal with reality as it actually is. Not that I think they want to do that, but maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's get back to the video.
But moral laws must have an origin, a moral lawmaker.
And you really want that to be your imaginary friend. Now, you can't demonstrate that, of course. You just really like the idea. But liking the idea doesn't mean anything. So, going back to what I was saying a minute ago, since now I have more context to where he was going, nothing that he has said so far has been about any actual moral laws. Legal statutes are not necessarily moral laws. Driving over the speed limit, that isn't actually immoral. I mean, I guess you could make the case that it's a safety issue, but there's a lot of things out there that are against the law that you can be punished for that have absolutely nothing at all to do with morality. It's like the religious don't actually understand what any of these words mean. And that's not especially surprising, is it?
And if there's no moral lawmaker or lawgiver above and beyond human beings, then who's to say which human beings have the right to impose their beliefs on others?
Well, generally, it isn't individual human beings, it's collective decision-making, often after the individuals have been elected to office by the society that they're supposed to represent. So those people, because those are the people that the majority decided they want to make those decisions on their behalf and whose decisions most citizens have voluntarily agreed to follow, that's really what's going on. Ultimately, it all comes down to might makes right, just like it does with most things, just like it does with a god. God can kick your ass, so you better do what he says, or else. So I'm just seeing that Calvin doesn't understand reality, which, again, that's not really much of a surprise, is it?
In fact, the mantra often heard in modern society is that people should have the right to decide right and wrong for themselves.
And if they lived alone on a completely deserted island, they could. If their actions impacted absolutely nobody but themselves, who cares what they do? Who's going to complain? Sure, you could make arguments that other living creatures might be impacted, but if you're not there and it doesn't impact you, then your arguments don't really matter, do they? It's not really any of your business. And that's why these decisions are made at the cultural or societal level. Individuals who aren't in spitting distance of other people, they don't get to make those decisions.
But that's clearly not tenable in societies where human beings with different opinions must live in harmony with one another.
Which is why it doesn't work that way. It's like Calvin has never ever left his own echo chamber and lived in the outside world, because this is not how it works. I think to some degree he probably understands it. He just wants to cast his own dictator god in the role of forcibly making people do what he wants them to do, often for entirely arbitrary reasons, because Calvin is an idiot. He objects to people forcing others to do what they want, but he doesn't see it that way when it comes to his imaginary friend, who is doing the exact same thing. I mean, it is the same thing, but at least one of them is demonstrably real, and it's not his god.
Some moral relativists declare that each separate country or society is responsible for determining right and wrong for their own people.
Which, whether you like it or not, is exactly how it works. Each society does make its own set of rules, which is how we know that objective morals don't exist. No god has imprinted inviolable rules on the hearts of humanity, because that's just nonsense. Yet, of course, he just doesn't like that. That's what this always comes down to, what these people like. Well, who cares about you? You are not important. And that's something that they just don't want to hear, isn't it? You don't matter. Most people don't matter. Most people are just irrelevant bodies that just hang around for a while, do absolutely nothing of any consequence, and then they just die to make room for the next generation. And if you say that to people and they have a strong emotional reaction, you know you are not dealing with a rational person. I'm willing to bet that you see that in a lot of theists who just can't deal with the world as it actually is. This isn't a problem with morality or reality. This is a problem with Calvin.
But in that case, to use an extreme example, weren't the, we'll just say the bad guys in World War II Germany, weren't they right for butchering 7 million Jewish people?
In their eyes, yes. Now, there is a lot of nuance here that Calvin just doesn't want to address. A lot of them were just as much victims as the people that they slaughtered, because if they didn't do it, they faced a lot of consequences for themselves and their families. But in reality, they generally thought they were right, people with bigger guns who fought a war against them and won, and those people thought that they were wrong, so they got what the winners figured they had coming to them. Might makes right, remember? Now, he's not going to like that, and it really doesn't matter if he does. That's just the way that it is. Learning to deal with the world as it is, that's an essential part of the maturation process, and sadly, people like Calvin have never grown up, and I don't think they ever will.
This was the way the bad guys argued during the Nuremberg trials. They declared that in their country's society, it was officially legal for people of a certain ethnicity to be killed, making such actions lawful and therefore not immoral.
Yeah, there he goes with that whole morality thing again. It had nothing at all to do with morality. It had to do with a bunch of people who won the war, and thus they had the power to impose their views on others, and because they had that power, they did so. Sure, there was a lot of rationalizations going on both sides, but in the end, the Allies got their way because they had the power and the control and the will to do what they wanted to do to people who, didn't. Does that mean that I agree with what the Nazis did? No, of course not, because I grew up in a culture where that wasn't acceptable, just like Calvin did. My views are shaped by the culture in which I live, and the culture in which I live says that killing people for no reason other than that they exist as a hated out group is a bad thing. Then we can go and look at some Muslim cultures which say that killing gay people or atheists or whatever, anybody they don't like, well, that's A-okay. Now, do I agree with that? No. Can I stop them from thinking that way? No, I mean, not unless we fight a war and round up all the people who do that or want to do that and put them all to death. So we just kind of look the other way, issue a few strongly worded condemnations, and generally we just live and let live. Because that's how the world actually works. Deal with it.
However, the argument offered by the Allies was the claim of the existence of a higher moral law, declaring the destruction of innocent people unlawful and immoral under any circumstances.
Just because they said it, that doesn't make it true. And this is why I talk about rationalizations and why they are just so pointless. Let's be honest here. I mean, a lot of the things that Germany was declared guilty of, they weren't moral atrocities. They were violations of existing treaties that Germany violated when they started going on an uninvited world tour. That was the majority of what actually happened, but nobody remembers that part of it. They just remember the people who got their panties in a bunch and got mad that a bunch of people died. Now, I agree, again, cultural indoctrination and all, but that's what people remember because they are emotionally predisposed to do so. That's why, in a war, it's the pictures of the dead GIs that get the most airtime. People have an emotional reaction to it in their gut, and that can be used to change people's views or to get them to do what you want. It's been done that way throughout history, and none of this has anything at all to do with a god.
In fact, they argued in accordance with an absolute moral law that transcends individual human reasoning or determination. So, where then do human rights and worth come from?
Humans. They come from us. We want to be worthwhile, so we just say that we are. We're right back to faith and fifis, and I am not like that. I want to know how the world actually is, or at least as close as I can get, given the tools and knowledge that we all have at hand. It doesn't matter what the world is like, so long as the picture that I have in my head is as accurate to that as I can get. I'll deal with it regardless. If there is a God, I want to know that there is a God. I want to see the evidence that leads to that conclusion so that I can find that it is supported. If there is not a God, then I want to know that too. If there are millions of pissed off deities out there that are going to torture everyone for all eternity, I want to know that. Knowledge and comfort are not the same thing, and I value knowledge a whole lot more than I value comfort. I am not going to lie to myself and tell comforting stories just so I'm not sad, because that's just stupid. It's a childish way to go through life. Too bad so many people want to be that way because, they're not very bright.
Well, a story I heard years ago will make the point. A couple in England discovered a vase in a thrift store and purchased it for a mere 10 British pounds. The husband thought the piece of junk was a waste of money, but like many husbands, decided against protesting his wife's wishes too strenuously.
Oh, good. More stupid stories. Now, this is just a, just so tale made to make a point. We see the religious trying this all the time, but I'll explain why I just don't care about any of it in a second, or at least I figure I will if this goes where I'm pretty sure that it will. Because this also comes down entirely to outlook. My outlook is not the same as I suspect Calvin's is going to be, or what he expects his audiences to be, but I guess we'll see how close I get.
He often made negative remarks about it until one day they happened upon a television program featuring antiques, showcasing a vase remarkably similar to theirs, which sold for over £100,000.
Yup, saw that one coming a mile away. And you know my reaction? I don't care. Because here's the thing. The goal of the thing, at least for me, is making my wife happy. If she bought something, and it doesn't really matter what she spent, but if it makes her happy, that's entirely fine with me. So if she just wants to go out and buy a tchotchke for an irrelevant amount of money, I am not going to complain. I don't care. She does that all the time. If it turns out later that it's worth a lot of money, I'm still not going to care since it wasn't an investment. It was just a meaningless purchase that made her happy. I don't care because I don't need that money. I mean, if I did, then sure, I might say it's a nice happenstance if she ever wanted to sell and she's smart enough to know that survival is a lot more important than a collectible. But if she doesn't want to sell it, then so be it. She doesn't want to sell it. I've got stuff sitting around right now that's worth a lot of money. I got it because I like it. I keep it because I like it. My collections are not for sale. I invest in other things to which I have absolutely no emotional attachment. So no, you're not going to get the reaction that I suspect Calvin is looking for from me, because I am not part of his target audience.
To their delight, appraisers determined their modest thrift store acquisition was very valuable indeed, and they managed to sell it for over £130,000. Now, the question we could ask is this: what changed the husband's mind from thinking it was a frivolous throwaway item to embracing it as the best decision his wife had ever made?
Hopefully he didn't. It was a lark. It was just a lark that happened to work out in their favor, but it was still just a momentary decision that meant absolutely nothing. If this had been the other way, she had spent a lot of money on it and it had turned out to be utterly worthless, would Calvin still be using this as an example? I don't think so. I'm still looking for anywhere that a god fits into any of this, because the name of the video is Atheist, Your Morals Don't Make Sense. Was this couple Christian or atheist? I mean, in the UK these days, they're much more likely to be atheists. Really, who cares? I'm still waiting for a point.
What was the difference in the perceived value as virtually worthless or practically priceless?
But see, that's the thing, and he even acknowledges it. It was perceived value. And that's really how value works. There is no inherent value in it. They got it cheap, and they found somebody else who was willing to pay them a lot. Because it's all in the perception, not in the actuality. If you go over to eBay, you can find people selling what most people would consider worthless junk for just absurd amounts of money. It virtually never sells, although I guess there is plenty of money laundering going on over there. But the perceived value differs greatly between potential buyers and the current owner. They just want it to be worth a lot. It doesn't mean that it actually is. And I'm still trying to figure out where so-called atheist morals come into this at all, because at the moment, he's just making my case for me. They tend to do that a lot, don't they? Because these people are idiots.
Simply put, he discovered its origin.
Which is entirely irrelevant. Just because something is old, that doesn't mean that it's valuable. I mean, seriously, you can find old Roman coins out there that are worth basically nothing because A, they're very common, and B, nobody really wants them. It's a matter of supply and demand. If there's more supply than demand, prices are low. If there's more demand than supply, prices rise. This is just basic economics, dude. Why don't you understand it?
It hadn't been mass-produced in a mindless factory in England. It had been carefully molded and made ages past by a master craftsman in China. You see, the origin of something determines its meaning. Its meaning determines its value, and its value determines what you should do with it.
Absolutely false. You can go to Egypt right now And go into some of the waste pits from the construction of the pyramids. You can dig out shards of rock that were created when the blocks were being produced. That's 5,000 years old, more or less. Are those worth anything? No. Why? Because it's not origin, it's not age, it's perceived value. Nobody wants a shard of rock from Egypt, no matter how old it is or how meaningful its generation might have been. If the person you're trying to sell it to doesn't perceive any value, then you are not going to be making any money. Keep that in mind, because I can tell you what's probably coming up.
Similarly, if human beings are just the result of mindless evolutionary forces originating in some primordial swamp with no purpose or meaning behind our existence, then we have no inherent absolute value and also no absolute rights.
You're right, we don't. So what? This is a problem that we see a lot with the religious, and to be fair, not just them, because right now I'm having this exact discussion over on an atheist subreddit with atheists, a lot of them who are going, but it's not absolutely true, so it's not moral. These people are morons. These people are not looking for facts. They're looking for comfort. The idea of having absolute inherent value or rights or morals or whatever, that comforts them, so they desperately want it to be true. Going back to the previous example, that is their perceived value. It only matters if the people that they're talking to also perceive it in the same way. And that's why they make these videos only for other Christians who think the same way that they do. But for somebody like me who doesn't perceive that claim as valuable, who doesn't care about inherent anything, who just accepts reality as it actually seems to be instead of how somebody else might desperately wish that it was, that is why he's preaching to the choir in his pathetic echo chamber and not to people who might not take him seriously. And because that's what he's doing, I am not at all impressed.
However, the realization that God created man as revealed in Genesis has profound transcendent lawful, moral, and practical ethical implications.
When was that ever proven? Because again, echo chamber. He's only talking to people who already believe that is true because he knows that he doesn't have a chance in hell of actually backing any of this up with evidence. This is what he wants to believe, not what he can demonstrate is true, and that's why we don't take faith in Fifi seriously. That's why you'd have to chase Calvin all the way back to square one and insist that he backs that up, and we all know that he couldn't do it. He believes it based on his faith, not based on demonstrable fact. And since faith is idiotic, there is no reason at all to consider the question further. So I'm still waiting for anything demonstrable, and I really don't think we're going to see it. How about you?
This was what the Allies argued against the bad guys from World War II, the existence of God's moral law. Ultimately, human beings have inherent value and worth because of their incredible creator, Jesus Christ.
You keep saying that, but that doesn't make it true. I mean, this video is addressed to atheists, ostensibly, but then he just keeps blathering on and on about things that no atheist at all is going to take seriously. Now, granted, we know it's not really for us because we just laugh, but it's hard to understand how these people can pretend to be making content to convince the unbelievers while having absolutely nothing but empty claims and blind faith to do it with. This is the religious mindset. They can't understand how anybody could be any different than they are, which kind of says a lot of unflattering things about the religious, doesn't it? This does not make you look good. In fact, it makes you look like a complete imbecile, running around telling other people that everything you believe is true just because you say so. That's not going to convince us of anything, except that you're really, really stupid. And I'd knock that off if I were you.
Even though we're corrupted in nature and sinful in our actions, God deemed us of such value that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life.
Oh good, my book says a thing. Who cares? I mean, I can't tell you how many religious lunatics that I've talked to who have tried this, and the second that I say, so what, they are just left gasping because they don't know what else to say. Mostly it's just, but you really believe because the Bible says so. Well, I don't care what the Bible says. You are just wrong. And that's when things inevitably break down because they have absolutely no concept of life outside their blind faith. It just has to be true and everybody has to believe it because otherwise, chaos. Yeah, welcome to the real world, pal. Stick around, you might learn something.
The great Scottish theologian Samuel Rutherford once eloquently wrote, "Oh, what love! Christ would come himself and in person suffer. He would not give a low and base price for us clay. He would buy us with a great ransom, so as he might overbuy us, and none could overbid him in his market for souls."
Who cares? Old guy says stuff that you like, so it's just gotta be true. I mean, this is really stupid, but of course, Calvin is out there looking for money, and he knows that the only people who are likely to give it to him are the believers, so he's just lying to them for a buck, just like almost all apologists do. Now, that's not to say that he doesn't believe this crap, but that doesn't make it smell any better, does it? I have no idea how these people think that are going to be successful with arguments as weak as these, but they certainly do persist, don't they? Why? Because as we all know, they just don't care, do they?
It is indeed a paradoxical marvel that our gracious God, knowing that his creations would rebel against him, completely unworthy in of themselves, deemed us worthy of the willing sacrifice of his Son.
You know, it isn't atheist morals that don't make sense. I mean, not that we have morals based on atheism or anything, but Calvin, he isn't bright enough to understand the nuance, so that's kind of obvious. But it's not us, it's him. He's just going on and on and on about all the things that make him feel good, as if any of it is true, and then he's just projecting that onto others. Well, you don't believe what I do, so it just can't make sense. That's assuming that anything that you believe makes sense, which, rationally speaking, it doesn't. This is why most of these conversations never go anywhere, because the religious can't get a grasp on reality, and atheists aren't going to take their unfounded, ridiculous assertions seriously. This is why we're just going to laugh, and we should.
From before the foundations of the world, we have rights in spite of our wrongs. God has indeed overpaid for us, but in doing so, he's applied even more value to the undeserving souls that he's saved.
Says you. Now, we're all just sitting around waiting for you to demonstrate any of this because we are not impressed with your lip flapping, and that seems to be all you can do. We don't care about what it says in your stupid book. Nowhere did he even address atheist morals with big air quotes. I mean, not really. He just preached all the things that the people on his side, the people with the wallets that he's trying to get opened, already believe. What do you think that's going to accomplish? It's going to make the opposition just laugh at you and leave nasty comments on your video, and that's what a lot of people in the comments are doing. I mean, go look for yourself. This is why these people have problems, because they don't understand the environment in which they actually exist. They just really want to believe and make a buck at the same time. And I'm sorry, but I am not at all impressed.
So the question for atheists is, philosophically, how does naturalism account for human rights? Make it make sense.
Easily. Because there is no such thing as inherent rights. If you think there are, then prove it. Back it up with something more than flappy, flappy, flappy lips. It's all just stuff we made up for our own benefit. Welcome to reality. Of course, they don't want reality. They just look at the world and say, but that doesn't make me happy, so it can't be real. Well, so what? Because just a second ago, just before I wrote this sentence, there was a Christian who popped up on Reddit and challenged atheists to destroy his faith. Of course, he just ignored what anybody said because his book says a thing and he just wants it to be true. But that's how this all works. You cannot have a rational conversation with any of these people because they have absolutely no concept of rationality. They believe because they want to believe, not because it makes any sense, and Calvin is doing the exact same thing. He just likes the idea. That doesn't make it true, but he doesn't care if it's true. He just wants the comfort. Plus, it's a convenient con to make a buck off the backs of gullible idiots online. And that's why nothing the religious say actually matters, at least not until they can back it up with demonstrable evidence. Because right now, it's just words and no substance with nothing backing it up at all. You need that substance. You need that evidence. You need to show that these things are actually so in the real world outside of your own addled head. They don't want to do that. They can't do that. But they don't care. And that is incredibly sad, but that's the way that the religious operate, and I don't know that there's any way to get them past it because we don't share a common view of reality. They want a magical happy land where everything goes the right way and where they have a magical father figure watching over them all the time. We just want reality. We want the world that we actually live in. We want to understand what's really going on. We don't care if it makes us happy or sad. We just want to understand it, and they can't handle that. If anyone has any suggestions on how to appeal to these people, let me know that down in the comments because it's really clear that nothing anybody on the atheist side is doing is actually working. And that's just really sad, isn't it?